never really tumbled, but I did a lot of the jumping and a lot of the stunting. And I think a huge misconception about cheerleading is that we just shake pom-poms and clap and create little chants, but that's not true at all. I mean, yes, we do those things. I'm not denying that. But cheerleading is so much more than those things. We do jumps and tumbling, and as easy as those look, it requires lots of conditioning, lots of stretching. It just takes practice. And stunting is even harder because not only do you have to have strength and for the flyer flexibility, but on the other hand, you have to have cohesion with your group. And the moment you're not cohesive, the stunt will fall and you could hurt somebody. And there's so much physics in cheerleading that cheerleading wouldn't even be a thing without it. Like most things, but cheerleading revolves around physics. It revolves around throwing people, but being in the air. The physics concepts in cheerleading include like gravity and Newton's laws, kinetic and potential energy, free fall. These are all various different things, and there's more. There's more than this. But as a cheerleader, I think it's very important to touch on these subjects and show why cheer really is a sport, why cheerleading is hard, and why it requires so much practice and isn't as easy as everyone seems to think it is. Gravity is used in all parts of cheerleading. With jumps, one has to have enough power, force, and momentum to get off of the ground and also have the ability to kick one's legs up in a way to perform a specific jump, then land on 2 feet when gravity pulls the person back down. So when this person has to jump up, gravity is already pulling them the moment their feet leave the floor. But they also need to have enough force to get their legs up in time before gravity pulls them back down. Another way gravity has to be manipulated in the sport is through tumbling. When a cheerleader is going to do a round-off back handspring, or something as simple as a cartwheel or a dive roll, her or his center of gravity, usually around the belly button area, is changing. This is why people fall. They don't have a good balance in their center of gravity. When someone is tumbling, or when they start, this is a terrible drawing of a back handspring, they have to have enough force, one, to push them onto their arms, and then have enough force to push them back, but as all this is happening, their weight force is pulling them back down. So they need to make sure that they have enough strength and enough power to get the whole way across, or they're gonna fall and hurt themselves. Gravity is also in stunting. Stunts require a base, a back spot, a flyer, and then sometimes a front spot. So these are the bases. There's a back spot back here somewhere, and then this is the flyer. The base is constructed of one or more people that hold the flyer in the air. The flyer, the person on top of the stunt, is held by the back spot, and their ankles or waist to provide more support to the stunt structure. The center of gravity, the flyer, must be balanced for this to work. So this is where cohesion really comes into play. They have to have enough force and enough strength to push their flyer against gravity and make sure the flyer can get up without falling. And the back spot is holding them, keeping them stabilized, so gravity isn't able to knock them off balance. That's why we need so many people, is to not only throw them around and do a bunch of stuff with them, but it's also to make sure they're safe and stay balanced. There are many instances in which momentum is used in cheerleading. A person doing a jump needs to have upward momentum, as does a person doing a stunt, specifically the flyer. When someone is doing a tumbling sequence, they need specific momentum forward, backward, or out diagonally in order to perform the trick correctly and without flaw. Even during jump, momentum is needed. After the force of the push-off from the floor, one must have upward momentum so they're able to execute the jump correctly. Potential energy has a lot of impact in cheer. When one gets to the peak of their jump and hits the motion, they have potential energy. When said person bent their knees in order to perform the jump in the first place, they had elastic potential energy. Anytime a trick is performed, there's potential energy at its peak. And as we know, stunts make the person go even higher up in the air. So since the flyer's height changes drastically, then the flyer has more gravitational potential energy, which is why it's so important to make sure they don't hurt themselves. The bases are able to catch them correctly so they aren't impacted as much by the force of hitting the ground. I think one of the most taken for granted parts of the sport is kinetic energy. In each and every jump, tumble, stunt, or anything else, there's tons of kinetic energy. And kinetic energy is really a huge part of cheerleading because you need kinetic energy to tumble, you need kinetic energy to jump, you're moving. Cheerleading is constantly moving, so you constantly have kinetic energy. And a lot of things you do even have a lot of potential energy. Energy is very important when it comes to cheerleading.
When it comes to stunting and when it comes to jumps, the kinetic energy is at its greatest point right before they hit the ground again. So when they push themselves up in a jump, that's the elastic energy of them bending their knees to have the enough applied force to get into the air. And then when they reach the peak of their jump, that will be their greatest amount of potential energy. As they fall back down due to gravity, right before they hit the ground, they will have the greatest amount of kinetic energy when they're doing any kind of jump. A straddle jump, a hurdler, a herky, any kind of jump, it'll be right before they land. And the same goes for stunting. The bases are using elastic energy to push the flyer up into the air, and when the flyer is at the peak of whatever their stunt is, it could be prep, it could be extension, whatever that happens to be, that is where they will have the greatest amount of potential energy. And when they're going back down, whether that be in squish or in cradle or however, right before they hit the ground, or even right before they hit like the base of arms, they will have the highest amount of kinetic energy in the stunt.
A large part of stunting is the force needed to get the flyer into the air when doing basket tosses or prep or anything else, a lib, extension, whatever. And force is used to pick them up from the ground as well. In some stunts, there's only one base and a flyer. Occasionally, the flyer balances on one foot while the base holds them up with one hand. This requires a lot of force to push the flyer up and keep her there, especially since the acceleration of gravity is pulling the other way. So a one-person stunt is just when someone is, that's the flyer, and then this is the person, hint, out of proportion, this is the person holding them up. And this person, even though drawn terribly, has to pick up this whole person all by themselves. And that takes a lot of force, it takes a lot of strength as well. But you're going against gravity. You're going against the weight of this whole person. So not only do you have to equal it, you have to be better. You have to have a greater force than the gravity in order to push them up and then keep them up, not fall back down.
force is not only important for stunting, but it is also important for jumping. So it's the same idea as stunting, but instead of the bases using their applied force to lift you up, you have to have enough applied force to get yourself up, which is why in jumps you can't get as high because you don't have more people lifting you up and more force going against your weight force. So you have to go against your own weight force in order to get up in your jump, and not only get into your jump high enough, but to get into your jump with the right position. And tumbling force is also important because not only do you have to be able to apply a strong enough force with your legs, but you have to have a strong enough applied force in your arms, depending on the move, of course. Like with back handsprings and roundoffs and even cartwheels, you have to be able to push yourself against your weight force to be able to move in that way. With things like back tucks and halves and fulls and layouts and all the other things where you're really just using your legs to flip yourself in the air, you have to have very strong and a pretty large amount of applied force in order to go against your weight force to be able to do the flip and execute it correctly.
Acceleration is huge when it comes to tumbling. When the acceleration is pushed into the right direction with the right amount of force, there can be more tricks performed at a higher level. If there isn't enough acceleration and not enough momentum can be produced in order to perform the rotations of the body during tumbles. That's why at cheer competitions, a lot of the tumbling passes, when everyone's going across and all that, they have a really fast start. They have to pick up a lot of acceleration in a short amount of time in order to perform more complicated tumble skills like folds and double folds and all that crazy stuff. Free fall is also a majority of cheerleading. And of course, the first is the obvious, when you have a flyer and they're falling from a stunt. Normally, not like falling down, but falling from a stunt that they threw up, and after the flyer is forced into air, he or she would fall back into the hands of their bases and back spot at 9.8 meters per second squared. Because as they're in the air, falling down, it's called a cradle. When you catch them, as they're falling, that they're only being affected by gravity, no other force. After the applied force from the bases threw them up, falls down completely due to gravity. The second time free fall occurs as a flip. It's executed like a back handspring, a back tuck, a half, a full, all that. As they push off the ground, the moment they push off the ground, they are in free fall. As they're twisting back or twisting forward or whatever the trick happens to be, they are in free fall until their hands or their feet touch the ground again. So there is lots and lots of aspects to cheerleading. Cheerleading is going against and using so many physics concepts, utilizing them to create a sport revolved around throwing people and throwing yourself. And so cheer is a sport. Cheer requires lots of energy and force, and physics is the reason we have cheerleading.